Shlomo Halevi ben Farida. Today we'll start Samach Vav 66b. Samach Vav on the base. It's 5 lines from the bottom, 6 lines from the bottom. The first of the wide lines. Gemara starts off Ashkechan Tamid Pesach D'Dach Shabbos, Pesach D'Dach Shabbos, D'Dach Tumim Minalan. Okay, we've been discussing what you're allowed to do on Erev Pesach that's on Shabbos. So we spoke about the shchitas for sure, that according to everyone. But other things were not so clear. But that was a machlekes Rabbi Lezer. Where did we get it from that you're allowed to bring the Korban Pesach on Shabbos itself? So we learned from the Korban Tamid. By the Korban Tamid it says Eila Shabbos b'Shabbatai Al Eila Satamid. So that's by the Korban Musaf. By the Korban Musaf it uses Eila Shabbos b'Shabbatai Al Eila Satamid, which means that the Tamid is brought on Shabbos. And then I have a Gezer Shava Mayadai from the Tamid to the Korban Pesach, that each of them are brought in its time. And just like the Korban Tamid was brought on Shabbos, so too the Korban Pesach was brought on Shabbos. The Gemara's question now is, how do you know that the Korban Pesach could be brought when everyone is Tamid? We mentioned that before, that it's brought B'tumah. Where do we know that from? No, so if one person is Tameh, then he brings it on the Pesach Sheni, a month later. But if the entire congregation is Tameh, they bring it then. And where do we know that's from? So Amri, they said like this. Just like we learned the Korban Pesach from the Korban Tamid regarding Shabbos, that just like the Korban Tamid is brought on Shabbos, all of the activities of the Korban Tamid, just the shechita and everything is brought on Shabbos, so to the Korban Pesach is brought on Shabbos if the 14th of Nisan is Shabbos. Linyan Shabbos, Hachanami, Yalef Tamid Pesach, Linyan Tama. We'll go the other way. We'll learn the Korban Tamid from the Korban Pesach that it's brought B'Tama. We didn't say yet where we know the Korban Pesach from, but we're saying that we're going to extend that to the Korban Tamid as well. The Pesach Gufei Minalan. Where do we know that the Korban Pesach itself is brought, even though everyone is Tameh, everyone is impure, they still go to the Beis Hamikdash and they bring the Korban Pesach. And then from that, once we figure that out, then we'll extend it over to the Tameh. Rabbi Yochanan gives us a source. Damakra ish ki tameh lenefesh. A man that is tameh to a corpse, tameh lenefesh, tameh to a corpse. Ish nidcha lePesach Sheni ve'in tzibur nidach lePesach Sheni ela avdi b'tumah. An individual is pushed off to Pesach Sheni. That's what that pasuk is referring to. It's in Bamidbar. It's in there's a Baloisra. An individual is pushed off to the Pesach Sheni, and the congregation is not pushed off to the Pesach Sheni. Now, okay, that's pretty clear. However, Rabbi Yochanan concludes with an assumption, and therefore they can do it B'tumah on the Pesach Rishon. Now, the diuk is there for the first part of this, that there's going to be a difference between an individual and the tzibur. The conclusion of that, what the difference is Rabbi Yochanan says that they can do it B'tumah on Pesach Rishon, and that was the source that we're looking for. Amar le Rish Lakish, the Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish is the brother-in-law of Rabbi Yochanan. He tells them, Chavrusa, Eima ish nitcha lePesach Sheni, tzibur les letakanta le b'Pesach Rishon v'le b'Pesach Sheni. He asks him, it's an obvious question. We see clearly that there's a distinction between an individual and in a community when it comes to Tumah. But the outcome of that, that's what Rabbi Yochanan wanted to say, is that the community can do it right away on Pesach Rishon, even though they're Tameh. How do you know that's the outcome? Maybe the outcome is of this distinction is that an individual does it on Pesach Sheni, and if the whole community is Tamei, they can't bring any carbon, not Rishon and not Sheni. How do you know it means that they can bring it on Pesach Rishon? Maybe it just means they can't. Now, if that's the case, so what we were looking for here is where do we have a source for bringing the carbon Pesach B'Tumah? Rabbi Yochanan found the source from a pasuk, and Rish Lakish says that's not a source. That pasuk could tell me exactly the opposite. So Rish Lakish needs a different source, that the carbon Pesach is brought B'Tumah, even if the entire congregation is Tumah. Elam Reb Shimon Lakish Mehacha, Reb Shimon Lakish says we have the following source. It says, Vayishalchem in Amachana, Kol Tzruah v'Chol Zav v'Chol Tamei L'Nefesh. You have to send out of the camp any Mitzayra, any Zav, v'Chol Tamei L'Nefesh, and anyone that's tummy to a corpse. So he asks a question like this. That's what it says. You send out from the camp. It doesn't say clearly. You see, what's going to happen here is that, we'll get to this a little bit later. The camps in the desert were divided into three categories in general. There was the Mishkan. There was the camp of the Levium that encamped around the Mishkan. And then there was a camp of Yisrael. So it's called Machane Shechina, Machane Levia, and Machane Yisrael. And then we carry that over to the Beis Hamikdash, to Yerushalayim. It goes like this: the Machane Shechina is the actual Beis Hamikdash. The Machane Levia is the outer part, the women's courtyard, and the Har Habayis, and then that's the Levia. And then the Machane Yisrael is the whole city of Jerusalem. Now, in that, there's a bunch of different levels as well. But when it comes to impurity, those are the three categories. Now, someone that's tummy for a corpse, that he came in contact with a corpse, is sent out of the Machane Shechina, but he can be in the Machane Levia. A Zav and a Balkari, those are impurities that emit from the body. Those are sent out of the Machane Levia as well. So there could be a corpse there in the Machane Levia, but there's no Zav or Balkari. Then a Mitzayra, but in other words, the Zav and the Balkari can hang out in Yerushalayim. They can't just go onto the Temple Mount. So they're in Yerushalayim. And of course, someone that's impure to a corpse, of course, can be in Yerushalayim. He can even be on the Temple Mount. He just can't be in the Beis Hamikdash. Then the Mitzayra is not allowed to be even in Yerushalayim. He has to be outside the city. Okay, so it goes like this. We're talking about here the first camp, the Machane Shechina. It says you have to send out of the camp any Tzruah v'Chol Zav v'Chol Tamei L'Nefesh. Everyone has to be sent out of the Machane Shechina. Just 1 second. Really, everyone's sent out. There's different levels here. But Reb Shimon Lakish says, Ya'imer Tamei Meis and Val Ya'imer Zavim Mitzayron. Let it just say the Tamei Meis has to be sent out of the Machane Shechina. And automatically I would know a Zav and a Mitzayra, for sure they have to be sent out of the Machane Shechina. But is it not a Kal V'Chaimer that they have to be sent out from the Machane Shechina? Ella, what it means is like this. It had to specify each one needs to be sent out because it's possible that there could be a time, it's possible that a Tmei Meis is allowed to be in the Machane Shechina. So that's why the Torah has to say clearly, not just the Tmei Meis has to be sent out. And that if it would say the Tmei Meis has to be sent out, then you would learn a Kal V'Chaimer. Then sometimes the Tmei Meis is allowed to be there, and I wouldn't know what to do with the Mitzayra and the Zav. When is the Tmei Meis allowed to be there? Tmei Meis is allowed to be there, obviously, when everyone is Tamei and they're bringing the Korban Pesach. So Rish Lakish has a different source. It's more of a complicated source. But his source is that why does it need to say a Zav and a Mitzayra sent out from the Machane Shechina? Let it just say Tmei Meis. And the answer is, because if we just say Tmei Meis, then sometimes the Tmei Meis is allowed to be there. And I wouldn't know what's going on with the Zav and Mitzayra. That's a Korban Pesach that's brought B'tumah. So Reish Lakish's source is this pasuk of the Yishalchim and Amachana Kol Tshuva Chol Zav Chol Tmei Nefesh. Tells me that sometimes the community goes into the Tmei Meis is allowed to go into the Machane Shechina. Amar Abaya. Abaya says, I hachi. According to the way Reish Lakish is doing this, Leiman Nami Yemer Zav Tmei Meisim Val Yemer Mitzayra Bani Amar Zav Mishtaleach Mitzayra Lekolshkin. Because I don't get what Reish Lakish is doing. Look at what he's doing. He's trying to say that the pasuk needs to tell me, it needs to itemize everyone that can't be in the Machane Shechina, because sometimes if we just tell me the Tmei Meis, then it's possible that the Tmei Meis would be allowed, and I would have everyone else itemized, specified. So if that's the case, then why do you need 3 categories? You should just have 2 categories. Why? Because is there really a distinction? Is it possible that sometimes 2 of the categories will be there and the 3rd one won't be there? Thus, is it possible that you'll have the Tmei Meis allowed and the Zav allowed, and the only one that's not allowed is the Mitzayra? Because if we just go like this, if we just say a Tmei Meis and the Zav are not allowed in to the Machane Shechina, then okay, sometimes the Tmei Meisim are allowed, but the Zav still isn't allowed. What would that tell me about the Mitzayra? If the Zav isn't allowed, then for sure the Mitzayra is not allowed, because the Zav is less strict than the Mitzayra. The Mitzayra is more strict. The Zav isn't allowed. So why did you have to say Vayishalchem in Amachne Kol Tzerua v'Chol Zav v'Chol Tzerua? Say a Zav in Tmei Nefesh, and that would have told me everything that you're telling me. It must be, according to Reish Lakish's logic, that there are times when a Zav is also allowed into the Machane Shechina. And that's why it has to tell me, specify, a Tmei Meis, a Zav, and then a Mitzayra, because sometimes a Tmei Meis and a Zav are allowed, but the Mitzayra is still not allowed. It's a biased question on Reish Lakish's pshat. Ella, what would come out from this? What's going to come out is that a Zav and a Tmei Meis are not sent out sometimes, but a Mitzayra still is. And that means that a Korban Pesach that's brought B'tumah, that's the entire congregation is Tamei, a Zav is also allowed to bring the Korban Pesach. And if you say, well, it sounds good, that's acceptable. If the Tmei Meis is allowed to bring the Korban Pesach, a Zav as well. But Tanan, you can't say that. We have a Mishnah clearly. Pesach haba b'tumah. Korban Pesach that's brought because the entire congregation was Tamei Meis. Lo yoichlum imenu zavim v'zavis nides v'yoldes. A Zav and a Zava and a Nida and a Yeleda, these are different types of Tumah. A man that's Tamei with a Zav, or a woman that's Tamei because she's a Zava, a Nida, or she gave birth, are not allowed to eat from that Korban Pesach. That means they're not included in that exemption. They don't have this special exemption, only a Tmei Meis. However, if they ate from it, they're potter. Okay, whatever the case is, we don't have any time when there's a Tmei Meis and a Zav that are allowed to be in the Machane Shechina, that it should have to specify a Mitzayra, that a Mitzayra is not allowed to be there. And as according to Reish Lakish's logic, it could have gotten away with just saying a Tmei Meis and a Zav, and I would have understood a Mitzayra automatically. Ela Amar Abaya comes up with another pshat. What's the source? La'ila mikra kama. Really, we have to learn from the first pasuk. That means Rabbi Yechanan's pasuk. Rabbi Yechanan's pasuk was ish ki atam lenefesh, a man, if he's impure, he's going to make a Pesach Sheni. Let it just say a man that's tamei. L'nefesh lamali. Why does it have to say tamei to a corpse? Why does it have to say he's tamei to a corpse? Just say that man that's tamei can make the Pesach Sheni. See, Rish Lakish had a question. Rish Lakish had a question. It's a question on Rabbi Yochanan. His question was that, okay, a Yachid is allowed to make a Pesach Sheni, but not a Tzibur. Now, maybe that means, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that meant that the Tzibur makes the Pesach Rishon B'Tumah. Rish Lakish's question says is maybe it means that the Tzibur doesn't make the Pesach Rishon at all. Comes along Abai and says, what do you say? If the Tzibur doesn't make the Pesach Rishon at all, so if that would be the case, so if the Tzibur is Tamei Meis, so according to, if we play it out, according to Rish Lakish, let's say everyone is Mitzrayim. Do they make a Pesach Rishon because they're Tamei? No, of course not. No one suggested that they should. Let's say everyone are Zavim. Should they make a Pesach Rishon? No. No one suggested that they should do that. I mean, we had a sort of a Havamina, but we got rid of that right away a minute ago. There's no exception for Zavim to make a Pesach Rishon B'Tumah. So they can't. So let's say they're all Tamei Meis. Can they make the Pesach Rishon B'Tumah? So according to the way Rish Lakish is suggesting that the pasuk could infer, based Rabbi Yochanan's pasuk could infer, no, it's his question on Rabbi Yochanan, there would really be no distinction between a Tamei Meis, a Zav, and a Metzora if the entire community had this Tumah, and you don't make the Pesach Rishon B'Tumah in any of them. So why does the pasuk need to say Ki Tamei L'Nefesh? If the pasuk is telling me that I don't make a Pesach Rishon, according to Rish Lakish's question, so then there's no difference if it's Tamei Meis or Tamei Tzaras or Tamei from Azav. It's all the same. L'Nefesh Lamali. Why does it have to say L'Nefesh? In other words, if the pasuk is telling me that you can make the Pesach Rishon B'Tumah, Tamei L'Nefesh, it says it good. Now that's what Abai is saying. It says L'Nefesh is significant because it's only the Tamei Meis that it's allowed to be B'Tumah. But again, Rabbi Yochanan quotes this pasuk that says there's a difference between an individual and a community. The individual goes to Pesach Sheni, the individual goes to Pesach Sheni, and the community makes the Pesach Rishon even though they're Tamei. Rish Lakish asked, maybe that means that the community doesn't make the Pesach Rishon at all. So comes along Abaya and says, if that's the case, then why does it have to say Tamei L'Nefesh? They don't make the Pesach Rishon at all. If that's true, then they don't make it at all by Tamei L'Nefesh, Zav, or Mitzayah. Any sort of Tumah, they don't make it. And if we'll say, Hai L'Nefesh Lach Yudasa, maybe what it means is like this. Hatami Meis Hu Denidcha Pesach Sheni. I will try to come up with another nuance here. Maybe what it's trying to tell me is that someone that's Tamei can make a Pesach Sheni that's specifically Tamei L'Nefesh, only if he's in the individual that's Tamei to a corpse, but not the other Tumas. That could be an answer. And then really, if the whole community is Tamei, they don't make a Pesach Rishon either. Notice we're following too with Rish Lakish's possibility. So he says, but that's impossible. It's impossible to say that there's a distinction between who's allowed to make the Pesach Sheni. Only the Tamei Nefesh. V'hatanya, we have a brisa that says like this. Maybe the only people that could make a Pesach Sheni, it says, it says those people, maybe those are the only ones that can make the Pesach Sheni. Someone that was a Zav, or a Mitzayra, he was a leper, Tzaras, or Bailei his wife was a Nida, he lived with his wife, and he gets the tum of the Nida as well. It's called the Bail Nida. So he's telling me he's not allowed to bring the carbon. How do we know that he also goes to the Pesach Sheni? Talmud Laimar ish. It says a man. That tells me that they also make a Pesach Sheni. Back to the question, why does it need to say lenefesh? Lenefesh, the kas of Rachman Alamale. Why does it need to say lenefesh? If no one is allowed to make a Pesach Rishon, if the community is tamei, so there's no difference. Elahachi kamar. Rather, what it means is ish nitchel Pesach Sheni vein tzibur nitchel Pesach Sheni alabdi betama. What it means is that the way Rabbi Yochanan said originally is that the individual goes to Pesach Sheni, but the tzibur stays at Pesach Rishon and they do it betama. Tzibur betama betmei meis. And when do they do it? When is this special exception that the community can make the sacrifice, even though they're tummy, that's only by Tamei Meis, but they don't do it by other tumas. That's why it says Lenefesh. Really, what Abaya did is he goes back and he explains the depth of Rabbi Yochanan, that if you play out Rish Lakish's question, it doesn't fit. Okay. Slightly complex. Abaya's, but it's really like a game. Like you follow it through, you see what's going to come out from this. What else could it mean? And that's okay. Amar Rav Chisda. New piece. Chisda says, "Mitzayer shenichnas lefnim mimechitzasei pater." If a Mitzayer enters where he's not allowed to go. Remember, he was sent out of Yerushalayim, Machane Yisrael. If he does enter, he's pater. Shenemar, because it says in the pasuk, "Badad yeshev michutz lamachane meishav." And he learns like this: Badad yeshev, he has to sit alone. Okay, Levada yeshev, that means alone. Michutz lamachane meishav. Outside of the camp is his dwelling. Hakasav nitkol lasei. Notice, even though it says that he's not allowed to come into the camp, but it also says that he has to dwell out of the camp. Now, what that's called a lavanitic lasei. Lavanitic lasei means that I have a prohibition, but it also has connected to it the rectification of that. The common example is if someone steals, he has to return. So he doesn't get malchus because he just returns it. It says what he's supposed to do. He returns it. So here also, it says he has to dwell outside the camp. So if he goes inside, it says he has to dwell outside. So he goes outside. Okay. Esvei, the Gemara has a question on this. It's quite a question. Someone, a Mitzayra that enters into where he's not allowed to go, he gets 40 lashes. It's a clear question on Rav Chisda. Zav and the Zav or Mitzayra as well, they go into where they're not allowed, a Zava rather, they go in where they're not allowed to go. They also get 40 lashes. Tami Meis, Mutali Kanis Machan Levi, Avalev Tami Meis Bilvad Amro, Elafilo Meis Atzmai. Tami Meis is allowed to go into the camp of the Levium, which that would compare to the Harabayas in Yerushalayim. And not only a Tamei Meis, that means someone that came in contact with the corpse, but the corpse itself is also allowed to. Shenemar, as it says, Vikach Moshe Satzmes Yosef Imai. Moshe took the bones of Yosef. Now Moshe was a Levi. Imai b'mechitzasai. Him in his camp. Him together in his confined, where he's in his border, in his partitions. It means Moshe had the bones of Yosef together with him. You have a question?
Is the punishment of Malchus associated with a derisa?
Yeah. Any negative prohibition is usually Malchus. Now, there's some that are stricter than that, but the general alav, let's say, is Malchus.
Okay.
That's usually how it's put. So now we have a question, because we have a contradiction with Rav Chisda. It's worse than a contradiction. A contradiction would be the same level. Here we have a statement from Rav Chisda, who's a Namaira, and we have a brisa that contradicts Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda said that a Mitzayra that enters into the camp is exempt. The brisa says that he's chayiv malchus. I saw this question. I don't know the answer to it, but what comes out, what we're learning, is that as a zav is not allowed to be in the machna leviyah. We're going to learn that a balkeri is the same status as a zav. That's what it's. Now, there's an inherent problem in this. This would mean that the Levium were not allowed to live in the machna leviyah together with their wives. Someone that lives with his wife, has relations, becomes a balkeri. It's an inherent problem. It doesn't. Do they have a separate camp for their wives outside the machna leviyah? Is that's anyway? That's a question. I saw it. I forget where I saw it. Maybe in the Torah Tamima somewhere. It's style. Okay. Tanoi. The Gemara answers, how do we answer this problem? It's a question on Rav Chisda. Chisda says that there's no punishment for the Mitzayra, and the Brisa says that there is. Well, we'll answer it. We'll say that Rav Chisda has his own support. That Brisa was following a certain Tana, and Rav Chisda has another Tana that he's following. Tanoi, it's Machlekes Tanoi. The Tanya was taught in the Brisa. The question is, do we say that the pasuk that says that you should sit outside the camp, is that an assay that is taking the lav and making it a lavanitic assay, which means that there's no malchus? So that's a machlekes Tanna. How to translate that pasuk? The Tanya was taught in a brisa. Badad yeshev, levada yeshev. He should sit alone. The mitzayra means that you don't have a group of tmeim there. I don't know what the Gemara means, tmeim acherim. Does it mean other people that are tamei? Why should they be there? They don't have to be there. They could be in the Machane Yisrael. Maybe it means other mitziraim. Other mitziraim, they can't sit together. They have the same tumah. I guess so. I guess that's what it means. And what is it talking about over there by the pasuk? The Abba Mitziraim, the 4 Mitziraim that are by the gate. What are they doing together? They're not allowed to be together, right? Yeah, I don't know. Okay. Maybe a zav and a tmei mace should be sent out of both the same camp, and they should be allowed into the same camp. Talmud Laimar, the pasuk says no, that's not the case. They should not contaminate their camps. Now, it doesn't say machanam, their camp, each of their camp. It says machanehem, their camps. Oh, litin machanel. It means that it's coming to tell us that they are not allowed into the camp. Each individual camp, they're not allowed into. You know, they each have their own individual camp. Machanam would mean their camp. In other words, there's a plural, possessive plural, but it's not a plural on the noun. It's not their camps. That would be machanam. Machanehem is each individual. Machanehem is a possessive, plural possessive plural. Okay. So they each have their own camp. And so, what does that mean? that the Tmei Mace has to leave the Machane Shechina, but he's allowed into the Machane Leviyah, into the Machane Yisrael. The Zav has to leave the Machane Shechina and the Machane Leviyah, but he's allowed into the Machane Yisrael. And then we said the Mitzvah has to go out of all three. Reb Shimon Aimer. Reb Shimon says, "Ein tzarech." It's not. This whole thing isn't necessary. It's not necessary. Harei Aimer. It says we already have a pasuk. Pasuk says, "Vayishalchem in a machna kol trua v'chol zav v'chol tmei lenefesh." Except we're familiar with this pasuk. To send out of the camp, we had it at the beginning. This was the pasuk that Rish Lakish held. And Rish Lakish used this pasuk to tell me that sometimes the Tamei Meis has to go is allowed to go into the Machane Shechina, but the Zav and Mitzvah are still not. That tells me that a Korban Pesach has brought out the Tumah. That's what Rish Lakish thought it should mean. Here, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is arguing with Rabbi Yehuda, and he says, what you're telling me is that there's different camps based on a pasuk of V'layitamus Machaneim. I know that from a different pasuk. What's the other pasuk? It says that a Mitzvah and a Zav and a Tmei Nefesh need to be sent out of the camp. Yomer Tmei Meis Val Yomer Zav, it's Tmei Zav. Let it say it's Tmei Meis, and it doesn't have to tell me the Zav. Vani Yomer, and I would understand automatically. Tmei Meis Mishdalchem Zav and Lekolshkein. Right? I heard this before. We heard this from Rish Lakish. Not chronologically before, but we happened to read that before. Of course, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was much earlier than Rish Lakish. So all it has to say is Tmei Meis, and if it's Tmei Meis can't be there, then for sure a Zav can't be there. Lama Nemar Zav. Why does it say a Zav can't be there? Litan leMachane Shnia. It's coming to tell me that he has his own camp that he's sent out of. I'm not talking about the camp, but Yishalchem in a Machana has a different meaning to the Tmei Meis and to the Zav and to the Mitzvah. Yishalchem in a Machana, which Machana? Machane Shechina is the Tmei Meis. Yishalchem in a Machana, which Machana? The Machane Leviyah is the Zav. It's different Machana. So that's why it has to itemize each one. The Yomer Zav al Yomer Mitzvah. So let it just say the Zav. Why does it have to say the Mitzvah if the Zav can't be in the Machane Leviyah? Vani Yomer Zav Mishdalchem Mitzvah leKolshkein. Then for sure the Mitzvah. It's coming to tell me the third machana, that the Mitzvah needs to leave the machana Yisrael as well. Now you go back to the pasuk that Rabbi Yehuda used before. That's entirely extra. Badad Yeshev hakasav nitkalasei. That's because it's a lava nitkalasei. When it says he has to sit alone, I already knew he was alone outside the camp. I already know that. I know that because v'yishalchem in a machana. So this pasuk is extra. It's coming to tell me that there's no malchus. It's a positive command that tells me that there's no malchus. Okay. All set? Everything good? Now all we have to do, one thing we didn't clarify here as we went through this, is we made it look simple that the Tmei Meis is a lenient tumah, because the Tmei Meis is allowed to go into the Machane Leviyah, and it's allowed to be in Machane Yisrael, Machane Leviyah. The Zav is more strict. He's not allowed to be in Machane Leviyah. And then we said that the Mitzvah is even stricter than that. He has to be outside all three. Now, do we really know that? We played with it based on accepting those facts. It's not 100% clear. You see, the problem with Tumah is like this, that when it comes to sending them out of the camps, we're going to have one way of classifying them. When it comes to the different levels of Tumah, what they make Tameh, how Tameh, the Tmei Meis is very Tameh. There's so many different criteria, different ways of looking at each thing, that you can't just line them up and say, 1, 2, 3, and say, oh, that's automatically how it is. No, it depends for what. So we have to figure out how we want to classify these different types of tumah, because we've been learning that, this one is stricter than that one. If this one isn't, for sure but it's not necessarily so. So let's take a look. My chomer de zav mit tmei meis. Why is a zav stricter than a tmei meis? that you said, oh, if the Tamei Mace can't be there, then for sure is Zav. Shekain Tumah Yitzalav Migufa. Oh, it's stricter because Zav has Tumah that emits from the person's body. The Tamei Mace just comes in contact, but it doesn't come out of the body. Gemara says, well, 1 second. Adarabah. That's just one criteria. Take a look at something else. There's other factors. The Tamei Mace needs the paraduma sprinkled on him on the third day and on the seventh day. That's pretty strict. Amar Kra Tamei v'chol Tamei l'Rabbi Tumah Sheretz. It says, what was that pasuk we quoted? Kol Tamei l'Nefesh. Yishalchem l'Machna Kol Terua v'chol Zav v'chol Tamei l'Nefesh. And all, it says in all Tamei, all Tamei, that's coming to include someone that comes in contact with the sheretz. Is not allowed to go into the machne shechina. Well, if a sheretz, someone that comes in contact with the sheretz, is not allowed to go to machne shechina. V'zav chamer mitamei sheretz. A zav is for sure more tamei than someone that comes in contact with the sheretz. My chomrei. Well, what? How do you know that? That zav is more tamei than is more strict. Well, kedamran, have we said already before? You said because the tumah emits from his body. Someone that comes in contact with the sheretz just happened to touch the creeping creature. That's not coming from his body. But the Gemara says, 1 second, Adarabba. Sheretz chamer came tamid ma'inas. No, the sheretz is more tamid than a zav because the sheretz makes a person tamei if he comes in contact with it, even if it was unintentional. Now, what does that tell me? You see, there's a certain criteria to the zav that the zav is an emission that comes from the body. Now, that emission could either come as a balkari or it can come as a zav. What's the difference if it comes as a balkari or it comes as a zav? Now, a balkari is very normal. It's when a man has an emission, and that's a normal thing. He lives with his wife, or he has an emission at night. So that makes him tummy. Zav is supposed to be abnormal. It didn't come from anything that he did, any thoughts or any activities, or eating different foods that would cause that. It didn't come from anything. It's totally funny. The term should be ba'inus, but it's not. It's used the other way. The zav only comes if he didn't do any of those activities that would cause that. Now, a sheretz becomes tamei, however he comes in contact with the person. So we're saying, no, 1 second, you see, the sheretz is more chamer because it doesn't have any of those limitations. A zav has a limitation on it. It doesn't become a zav if there was thoughts or other activities involved that could have caused it. Where says 1 second. Amri, you want to say that a zav is more lenient than a sheretz? Okay, the way a zav works, we're on top of 67b. The way it works by a zav is that if he has one emission of zivas, then he has the same status as a balkari. He's tummy just for that day. If he has a second emission, then he's tummy for 7 days. If he has a third emission, then he also has to bring a karban. Now, Rav Huna says that the first emission of a zav that gives him the same status as a balkari also makes him tummy, even if it came in the same way a balkari has a mission. You say, so why do you call him a zav? Call him a balkari if it's the same. If it came after he ate or had thoughts of whatever activities, why do you call him balkari? It's apparently the color of the emission is different. One's more cloudy. One says it's considered like an egg. The white of the egg that's mixed, that's scrambled, the one that's not scrambled. There's a different color to it. Okay, whatever the case is, you're trying to tell me that a sheretz gives off a tumah that's stricter than a balkari because it's that tumah comes no matter what the conditions were. Well, it turns out that the balkari has the same thing, at least in the first siyum, according to Rav Huna. Okay, so now we have our explanation is like this. We learn that we know that a zav is more strict than a sheretz because it's tumah yotzei mikufa. Maybe the sheretz is more strict. Well, we said no, the zav is more strict. Like Rav Huna says, that there's only a chumrah in zav. Now, if a zav is more strict than a sheretz, then the fact that a sheretz is not allowed to enter into the machne shechina because it says v'chol tamei, and it's including anyone that comes in contact with the sheretz. So for sure, a zav isn't allowed to enter in there, and that's what we're holding now. Now we ask, my chumrah de mitzayrim is zav. How do you know that a mitzayir is more strict than a zav? That you said that if a zav is not allowed to enter, for sure a mitzayir isn't. We say like this: Shkeinton priya prima vasivatash mesamita. Mitzayir has some stringencies that don't apply to other tumas. He needs to leave his hair uncut. His clothing needs to be torn, and he's not allowed to have relations with his wife. Vasivatash mesamita. So, and a zav is allowed in all of those. He doesn't have to. The zav is allowed to cut his hair. He doesn't have to tear his clothes. And he's allowed to have relations with his wife. The woman that's a zava would not be allowed to have relations, but a zav is allowed. It's an interesting. The Gemara says 1 second. Adarabba, zav chamer. The zav is more strict. Shekein metame mishka v'moishem metame kleicheres beheset. A zav sits on a bed, the bed gets the same tumah as him. It makes other clothing tummy that touches him. Zav is it's called tumas medras. He sits on a chair. So even if he walks on certain things, he puts his weight on something. And if he moves a klicheres, even though he doesn't go inside it, but he moves it, he doesn't put something tummy inside it. He even just moves it by the back of it. So the klicheres becomes tummy. So a zav is more strict. The mitzayir doesn't have those tumas. Amarkra zav v'chol zav v'rabis balkari. It says when it says v'chol zav, it's coming to tell me also a balkari, and a balkari doesn't have those stringencies. So I know that if a zav and a balkari have the same halacha, that both of them are not allowed to be in the machna leviyah, and mitzayir is for sure stricter than a balkari. Mitzayir chamer and balkari. Why is a mitzayir stricter than a balkari? Kedamran, that you said already. He has to let his hair grow. He has to tear his clothes. He can't be with his wife. Balkari is allowed to. So the Gemara says 1 second. Adarabba balkari chamer shekem metame b'mashu. The spot of a mitzayir has to be the size of a gris. A gris is a half a bean. A balkari becomes tamei, according to what the Gemara is saying right here, is that even the slightest amount of the emission, even if the smallest amount of mashahu, which means not even a measurement, just a teensy drop, that would make him tummy. See, balkari is stricter than a mitzayir. A mitzayir needs a certain size, and a balkari is even stricter. It's the smallest amount. The Gemara says, well, you don't have to go like that. Savalakar of Nasan. This opinion that was telling us, which was basically Reb Shimon's opinion, that says that I would automatically understand that each one is sent out of the camp because this one is stricter than this one, and etc. I don't need the pasuk to specify. Why is it specifying? It's coming to tell me that they each have their own camp. So it says that he holds like Reb Nasan. The Tanya Reb Nasan Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Zav Tzarich Kechasimus Piyama V'Leihoid Lechacham V'Skishli Balkari Luzav. Reb Nasan says that it's not true that the smallest amount makes a person tamei. Reb Nasan says that a zav only becomes tamei if the top of the bris milah, the top of the male organ is sealed with this emission, as if it was enough to fill in that opening, so that would make him tamei. But if it's smaller than that, then not. Now the truth is, that would be smaller than a gris, the size of a bean, but nevertheless, it's not a mashir. It still has a shear. They say it has a shear. Okay, it's not considered a chumrah. Now we say if that applies, Nassim says applies to Zav, it also applies to a Balkari that it needs to be a shear. So then a Mitzayra is only stricter than a Balkari because both of them have a shear, and the Mitzayra has those other halachas. Okay. The Gemara now says v'chol tzarua lamali. Why does it? What do I learn from v'chol tzarua? We said v'chol tamei taught me someone that comes in contact with a sheret. Kol zav comes to include a balkari. What is kol tzarua? Anyone that has leprosy. What is anyone? I did the cause of kol zav ksiv nami kol tzarua. Okay, we don't learn from that. That was just coming to keep it symmetrical. You said kol this, kol that, and kol the next one. So we said kol. Surprising answer after being so detailed here, but okay. Rabbi Yehuda Shaper Kamer Reb Shimon. The Gemara says, what does Rabbi Yehuda do? You have a question, Naftali?
Yeah. Is this discussion we're in now, is it relevant to the question it started with, or is it just, while we're on the subject, let's talk about what these classifications mean?
We've gotten past the Korban Pesach being brought on B'tumah. We've gotten past that. We have our basic answer for that.
Right.
Now, the psukim that we quoted, though, are still being discussed.
So it's really, let's discuss this particular subject while we're here.
Right.
Because we have the answer with respect to the Korban Pesach.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right. But it did leave us with, in other words, we're still quoting Rish Lakish's pasuk. We're still learning with that pasuk. And the reason why we're learning that pasuk because Reb Shimon uses it to tell me something on Rav Chisda, where Rav Chisda says that he doesn't get malchus if he comes in. So we're still discussing that. I would say that the Gemara is now discussing malchus by if the Matzera comes into to the camp. Now that's based on which pasuk, what the pasuk was teaching us. If the pasuk is extra or not. Now Rabbi Yehuda said that the pasuk was not extra. Rabbi Shimon said the pasuk is extra. Now the Gemara is asking, if the pasuk is extra, then that means that the pasuk is only telling me that there's no malchus because it becomes a lavanitic lessay. So the Gemara says Rabbi Shimon said good to Rabbi Yehuda. What is Rabbi Yehuda saying? That I need the pasuk. So Ahumi Bayale, Rabbi Yehuda says that pasuk is needed. Lekidetanya. What was taught in a brayso. Rabbi Lezer Rami Yachol Doch Guzav Mitzayra Minechnas Lazar BePesach Ababetuma Yachol Yil Chayavin. Let's say they actually come in. A Zav and a Mitzayra, they actually come in. They say like this. They say, everyone's going in. Everyone's tamei. And they're all going into the Beis Hamikdash to do the Korban Pesach. The only thing is that they were tamei mace, and they're allowed to go in. Comes along these two fellas, one's a Zav and one's a Mitzayra, says, oh, the Tameim are going in, let's go in. Maybe they should be Chayav Karas. Now, we mentioned this before on the top. We said, B'machlu Peturim. We said the Zav and Achlu Peturim. We came across this a little bit. Let's say they should be Tamei. So Talmud Lem Rabbi Yishalchem and Amachana Kol Trua V'chol Zav V'chol Tamei L'Nefesh. B'shoshet Tamei Mesim Mishtalchem, Zav and Mitzayra Mishtalchem. Ein Tamei Mesim Mishtalchem, Ein Zav and Mitzayra Mishtalchem. That means that it's only at the time when the Tamei Mace is sent out, that's when there's going to be a chiyuv on the Zav and the Mitzayra, if they go in. Amar Mar, we talked before, Zav v'chol Zav l'Rabbi Balkari. When it says Kol Zav, it's coming to tell me that a Balkari has the same status. A Balkari is not allowed to be in the Machane Leviyah. This is where the question that I mentioned before, it becomes like really significant. Messiah Rabbi Yochanan. This supports Rabbi Yochanan. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mechilas Leiniskadshu. Rabbi Yochanan says that the tunnels were not sanctified. The tunnels of the Beis Hamikdash. It means only the floor level was sanctified. The tunnels are not sanctified. Now, Ubalkari Mishtali Echos L'Shtei Machnas. And the Balkari is sent out of the two camps. Now, does this have to do with Mechilas Leiniskadshu? Or is it irrelevant? In other words, Messiah Leila Rabbi Yochanan gave two statements. One is the tunnels aren't sanctified, and a Balkari has to leave two machnas. What does it mean? That a Balkari is the same as a Zav. So what does that first statement have to do with anything? So the second statement, Rashi says, there's nothing to do with anything. He said, Rabbi Yochanan said them together, so we listed both. The other commentaries say no. What it means is that the Balkari, that the Mishnah says, leaves the Beis Hamikdash. He leaves through one of the tunnels. Why? Because he's got to get outside without being in an area that's not allowed to be coming. So there is a connection there. Rashi doesn't learn like that because I think the Mishnah was clear that he doesn't actually do that. I think it says it comes up and he waits on the Harabayas until the gates open, or he waits with his brothers and then he leaves. So it's maybe a problem with that shot. Okay, Meisvei. The Gemara has a question. Balkari kamaga sheretz. Balkari is the same level as a sheretz, someone that touches a sheretz. My lav lamachanaisam. Is it not that just like someone that touches a sheretz is not allowed to go into the machane shchina, to the Beis Hamikdash itself? The Balkari also is not allowed to go into the machane shchina, but he's allowed into the machane leviyah. The Gemara says lai l'tamaisam. It means when they touch something, they don't have to wait 7 days. That's what it means. The Gemara says 1 second. That we know from Psukim. You don't have to tell that to me. It must mean that it's telling me which camp they're sent out of. That means that a Balkari is only sent out of the Machane Shchina, which is a question on what we just said. We said the Balkari sent out of Machane Leviyah as well. It says really it means regarding their Tumah. It's coming to tell me that it doesn't matter how the emission took place, just like it doesn't matter how the person touched the sheretz, if it was on purpose or not. So to the Balkari, it doesn't matter if it was done the emission was caused because of activities or not. It's always coming. That's what it's coming to.